construction of race and racism. The advent of white supremacy was not some happy accident stumbled upon by Europeans. It was by design, turned into science, made law, and taught at every level of education. So what is this thing called race? Race is a false classification of people that is not based on any real, accurate, biological or scientific truth. In other words, the distinction we make between races has nothing to do with scientific truth. Race is a political construction. A political construction is something created by people that is not a natural development. It is constructed or created for a political purpose. The concept of race was created as a classification of human beings with the purpose of giving power to white people and legitimize the dominance of white people over non-white people. In the 19th century, 1800s Europe, science and social science developed as never before. Associations of scientists were created, universities held conferences, and debates and dialogue between researchers increased dramatically. In England, in the early 1800s, the ethnographic and anthropological societies were first established. Not only did the amount of scholars and thinkers multiply, they were increasingly in conversation with each other and focusing on similar themes, such as what happens when races meet and mix. Africa, Asia, Australia, and the South Pacific were rapidly being colonized, as European Americans were engaged in their colonial expansion, which brought them into brutal contact with Native Americans. As a result of colonization, Native people around the world were disappearing. The most extreme cases found in Tasmania, an island south of Australia. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, Tasmanians were literally wiped off the face of the earth, while the Maori population of New Zealand was reduced by more than half in a period of a few decades. The extinction was in large part due to disease. European thinkers were fascinated by this, particularly due to the lack of understanding of the role of germs, viruses, and bacteria. Scientific racism. Science as a justification for racism. During the 19th century, Darwin published On the Origin of Species, 1859. His book documenting the process of evolution, Darwin believed in a natural order to the development of species. The weak die off and the strong survive. Although evolutionary theory is not racist, philosophers and social scientists use Darwin's theory in pseudo-scientific ways to justify genocide and racism. This thinking was later called social Darwinism and had brutal implications. In 1838, J.C. Pritchard, a famous anthropologist, lectured on the extinction of human races. He said it was obvious that the savage races could not be saved. It was the law of nature. In 1864, W. Winwood Reade, an esteemed member of both London's Geographical and Anthropological Societies, published his book called Savage Africa. He ended the book with a prediction of the future of the black race. England and France will rule Africa. Africans will dig the ditches and water the deserts. It will be hard work and the Africans will probably become extinct. We must learn to look at the result with composure. It illustrates the beneficent law of nature that the weak must be devoured by the strong. It should be noted that there were many examples of this type of thinking. Pritchard and Reade were all highly regarded thinkers around the world. Native peoples in Africa, Asia, and the Americas were dying and disappearing. The predominant scholars didn't think this was due to the unlawful seizure of land, which undermined their lives, culture, and means of survival while spreading disease and death. This genocide was justified by the laws of nature, i.e. survival of the fittest. European and European American colonization of native land throughout the world in this period created the very real consequence of extermination. This provided motivation for allegedly scientific research, which in turn provided exterminators with an alibi declaring the extermination naturally inevitable. The pseudo-scientific attempts to categorize the races. Throughout the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, people used different terms to explain racial differences. The classification lacks any obvious logic and defies scientific precepts. Two of the words Mongoloid and Caucasoid have linguistic bases that refer to geographic areas, but the last word Negroid refers to colour. These were not based on genetic differences, but rather on European and European American stereotypes of cultural differences and mismeasures of psychological characteristics. In 1866, Frederick Farrar lectured on the aptitude of races, which he divided into three groups. Savage, all Africans, indigenous people of colour with the exception of the Chinese. Semi-civilized, Chinese who were once civilized but now their society was in arrested development. Civilized, European, Aryan and Semitic peoples. You've been misled. You've been had. You've been took.